Hi, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Love Your Work. This is my opportunity to talk with guests about the work that they love and the lessons that they've learned along the way. And today I have with me Andrea Hips. She is a divorce coach. Andrea, how are you?
Hi, I'm great, Whitney. Thank you for having me here today.
It is my pleasure. I want to just jump right in. We were talking beforehand, and when I went to law school, I had like two like non-negotiables about what I wasn't going to do, and one of them was family law. And here you are working with clients who are going through this like really challenging time in their lives. How did you come to a place where you would be coaching in this area? And then share with us a little bit about what divorce coaching is.
Sure. Well, like most people, my own story led me to this career. About a decade ago, I started going through my own unwanted divorce. And what I was noticing when I looked around was I didn't really see any women or families that had created a post divorce family that looked like they were comfortable in it. They were still kind of leading with resentment, a little bit of bitterness. You could tell there was some tension, and I was like, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to be a part of this. And so I've just been on a search in my own life for how can I create a beautiful two address family that I feel at home in, that my kids feel at home in, and that I can comfortably welcome their other parent into. And so that led me along the way to gathering like-minded people who were also in pursuit of really a different narrative around divorce, because I'm sure one of the reasons you felt so resistant to doing family law is it's not a great narrative. we
No.
don't we don't have a real vision for families after divorce that includes any sort of redemption or beauty. It's really just sort of survival and good luck.
Yeah,
And so divorce coaching for me started informally because I started attracting people to myself who were in search of that same sort of unknown but desired place of healing. And I got certified, and after that really started to be able to dig into the kinds of people that divorce coaches help, which is really on the whole continuum. You've got people who are in the do I or don't I stage, who are really trying to wrestle through what does it mean for me to stay and what does it mean for me to go. You've got people in the messy middle who just don't know which way is up. And then you've got people, I have some clients who are even 5 or 10 years out of divorce who still have divorce debris that they are needing to clear out in order to move ahead. And so the American Bar Association describes divorce coaching as sort of a supportive, flexible process that really helps people keep their goals in mind and make not only educated decisions, but decisions that help support your family and yourself going forward.
wow. Is this is so fascinating because as you're describing that, those were all the things that I was focused on. I went through my own divorce, probably, had something to do with why I wasn't interested in doing family law. It was a contentious divorce. Well, the divorce itself wasn't contentious, but the custody issues afterwards were. And but I was very focused on, and I love that you said this. I had a vision for what I wanted my life to be like and what I wanted for my son. Didn't so much care about what the other parents, what that was going to be like, but I knew what I wanted, and so I was very focused on making sure that that happened, right? I didn't want to be a statistic when it came to falling into poverty, which is something that happens to women in particular post divorce, right? They end up in poverty and the husband ends up much better off down the line on average. And so, for those of you who are like saying, I ended up in a poorhouse too. I'm not talking about you, just talking about on average. But I was very focused on wanting a good relationship for my son with his father. I wanted a good relationship with my son, provide a home, and I did not want to end up in poverty, which ultimately is how I ended up in law school. because I didn't want to go down that path. So that you are helping people to think about that, right? To not be, as you said, in the messy middle. How did you get to, is that part of the training itself that helps you to come to that, or was that something that you've developed as part of your business and practice?
It was interesting in the work that I was doing early on. It was highly vision focused, exactly the work that you found yourself doing, which is to say 10 years from now, when I'm out of the very tense and difficult experience of divorce, what do I really want my life to look like?
Mhm.
And the problem that most people have when they cast out that vision is they have a vision that their partner, their former partner, has now become an amazing human. And that rarely happens for people. That person who you're getting a divorce from, generally speaking, isn't going to be changing. They're still going to be doing all these things that annoy you, and they're still not going to be doing all the things you wish they would do to stop annoying you. And so there is a sort of a fairy tale of co-parenting that we place on people that really isn't fair when you're starting out from a place of completely dismantling your marriage. And now, hey, let's go co-parent and make this beautiful vision and sort of be that celebrity couple that wants to be, celebrated for what they pulled off. I really encourage people in the early stages to parallel parent, which really means you allow that person, your former partner, your child's other parent, to really live the life they're going to live anyway. And for you to really, just as you said in your own life, how do I want to level up my own experience? How do I want to guarantee that I have my finances, my mental health, my lodging, and those kinds of parenting issues all in place,
Right.
and get out of this person's business? Because every time you keep dragging them in when they're not willing and they're not ready, you just create more barriers to you getting where you need to go. And so,
Right.
yes, there is some sort of intuition on my part that it sounds like you had too, where it was like, let's focus on where we want to be 10 years from now and reverse engineer our life to get there. But there's also a great deal of science behind that too, that really came into play when I got my training, which is that when you go into divorce, or when you're even contemplating it, you get into fight or flight. And that stress response of fight or flight, you kind of make a home in
Mm.
for several years.
Mhm.
And it's exhausting, and it is really hard on your body, and it's really hard on your brain. And I know you know what I'm talking about because we both did it. And being able to step out and really start to get that future focused approach pulls us out of fight or flight and pulls us into that logical reasoning side of our brain that honestly is far more supportive than the one that's going hysterical. And so it was nice in my training to see that hunch be supported by brain science that really suggests we have got to get ourselves out of now into the future. And when we're in the future, we need to get ourselves out of our co-parents' business.
And what is the challenge you have in getting your clients to break away from that? Because the work we do in general is about patterns, right? And stories that we're telling ourselves. And you know, particularly if someone is feeling wronged or aggrieved, to get them to let go of that story in order to be able to make space so that they can could make that shift. How do you find that challenge in your work?
Well, I think the idea of story is a really interesting one. And I feel like the first step I'm always taking with people is to allow them to have the story.
Mm,
Because
okay.
I do think a lot of people um, need to realize that their story has an end point, and then you're still stuck with the life that you have. Like, keep your story, keep the story that you were, taken advantage of and wronged, and everything that he did made it difficult for you, and now you're not, it's not fair that this is going to happen, and now you're kind of screwed because this is going to happen. Okay, keep your story. It's a great story, and if you want to keep going with it, I'll tell you where it's going to end: bitterness, resentment, your own dreams not being realized, your kids feeling very awkward around their other parent, you feeling very awkward around the other parent. And so the first step is keep your story. Now, if you want to exchange it for a new one, that's where divorce coaching can really come into helping you check your own self about the story that you're carrying.
Right.
And one of the ways that we start to do that, and again, this is a process and it really depends on the level of intensity in your own divorce experience, but I tend to start all of my clients on two things: a best self exercise, which is really calling out the pieces of you that are most present when you are experiencing a tremendous sense of well-being.
Mhm.
So what are these 10 things in your life that constitute what it means to be at my best? And what happens in divorce is we take that and set it over here and then start doing some other crazy stuff, which we're never proud of. And so we talk about how do we keep bringing that best self and those 10 qualities to bear on the divorce situation. And so that has a huge sort of trajectory shift in terms of your story, which is now I'm no longer the victim, which is what everybody wants to start as. And frankly, if there are people listening right now who feel that they are the victim, that's a very valid place to start. We're tribal. We don't want to lose our community. And part of what helps us keep our community is that story of being the victim. Like, oh, poor me, I'm going through this really hard time. Therefore, I'm going to keep this friend and this friend and this friend, and he's not going to get any friends. There's something really primal to doing that. So it's a fine starting place. But I think over time, you start to realize I have a huge role to play in what I am creating for myself going forward. Does that make sense?
It makes absolute sense. And having sort of lived through that, I don't know that I consciously thought about some of the things that you're saying, but there are some things that I was very conscious about and very intentional in the steps that I took going forward. One of them was not wanting to be bitter, not wanting to be angry, those sorts of things, because ultimately I was focused on my son, right? And,
Right.
and that's my experience. And it was, how do I get out of my own way to do what's best for him?
Right.
Um,
And that often means you have a way of operating in the world that will, as a result, bless your former partner. And I think that's where people get tripped up too. Well, if I'm nice and I offer this and I do this and I pick up the slack and I do the scheduling, I'm just letting them get away with it. We
right.
have to sort of shift ourselves back around to, I love to tell the story of a girlfriend of mine whose daughter turned 11. And when she turned 11, she was going to get her own room. At the time, she was sharing it with her sister. And she was so excited, getting this own room, getting rid of the other sister. She got to decorate it. It was all exciting. And the day came for her to move into that room. And she realized as she was walking down the hallway into that room, that by virtue of her getting her own room, her sister just got her own room. And all of a sudden, the joy of having her own room was just completely crushed by the fact that her sister was benefiting from her, getting this great experience. And that's how it is in divorce. When we become better divorcees, we allow our former partner a better life. And I think that really, really, really makes people mad. And that's one of the things that divorce coaching helps you work through.
Interesting. That's not something that I thought of, because I'll be honest, I was like fully focused on me. We ultimately ended up with joint custody, physical and legal. And I took that opportunity to go back to school.
Yeah.
That's when I went to law school, because it created space in my life. And it was hard, right? You're a parent, you don't want to be away from your child. But I recognized there was an opportunity in that. And so that's the whole point of kind of what we're talking about here, is like, what are the lessons that we learn and the things that we go through, these challenges that we go through, whether it's life or work or what have you. So I'm interested in knowing, stepping back a little bit from the divorce coaching, where did you start? Obviously you said that this was sort of out of your own experience, but what were you doing prior to becoming a divorce coach?
Sure.
And then I want to step a little bit back from that.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I went to school and I went to college in Texas, and there developed a real passion for helping contribute to solutions around the issue of affordable housing and homelessness. And actually during my college career, worked with some women who were attempting to become resident managers of their own public housing community. And so ended up doing some studies with them and some research with them, and really got intimately connected to how our experience of housing stability affects our ability to do anything else in life. And so went on from there. I have a social work degree, went on from there to work directly with clients who were homelessness, women who were finding themselves experiencing homelessness. They moved into transitional housing that I provided case management for. And then from there realized I don't like working with these people when there isn't enough housing. And so I switched and I moved into the finance side, and I started working for a state housing finance agency. I worked for a local government, and more recently was involved with a nonprofit that does affordable housing development, just so that we could start to bank more units. And I think over time, what's interesting is as I've transitioned from that career into this one, I feel like the overlap is there's a homelessness that is real and very affected by four walls. And then there's a homelessness of heart, I think, that happens for people going through divorce, who really are kicked out of and evicted and put on the streets of what was their life. And they're not quite sure if they can make home again, whether that's with four walls or just even in themselves. And so I think I'm just naturally drawn to people who need more structure, who need something set up, who need to know, here's where you could start to build a life. And so that's how I sort of weave those two together in my own mind.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask you how, if at all, you saw the two connecting, and you already did that.
I think that the community wants to help people who are homeless, and they often feel disempowered to do so.
Yeah.
If you hand out money, you're made to feel as though you are not supporting them. You don't feel like you have enough time to give the kind of support that a nonprofit might need from you in terms of volunteering. And you have your own understandable misgivings about welcoming homeless people into your own house. And so it kind of just becomes this awkward thing that you just hope goes away. And I think the same is true for families who are going through divorce. We don't know what to do with them. We're kind of left to feel awkward. We're not sure if we're supposed to be choosing sides of, am I on his side or her side? And the kids, and what are we doing for play dates, and who's coming over, and who do we call on which weekend? And so we just kind of distance ourselves from it. And I, as a practitioner, really want to help people learn how to help others step into their lives. And so that's part of coaching too, is that we work on how do we do this transition so that our community knows how to support us and how to connect with us in this awkward space.
Right. And what do you love most about the work that you're doing?
Oh my gosh, the absolute freedom that exists for people when they start confronting the ways that they are thinking, which are causing them the feelings that they don't want to have, and they're getting the actions and results that they no longer want. When they are able to clear the air inside themselves and create new ways of firing thoughts that get wired together, and the joy and the freedom that they experience when they do that, and how who their former partner is almost is irrelevant anymore whenever they start to do this work. And it is really just, it is an absolute pleasure of my life to be able to watch people go through this kind of transformation. It really is.
I could imagine. And again, love that piece where it is about your client, right? And it's not about the other parent, or if there are no kids involved, the other partner. It just isn't about them. And it's about you ultimately.
Yeah. And that's a huge mindset change for anybody, but especially for somebody who's been married.
Yeah.
And when you're married and when you have kids in common, you think the way to resolve this is to drag that person into the situation and to hammer it out. And frankly, divorce means your marriage reached a level of unhealth that you don't have that opportunity right away. Very few people get that. And I applaud the people that can come to it more naturally, but I don't want those of us who have very difficult co-parents to feel like we've somehow failed because we weren't able to get them involved. You need to measure yourself based on what you're bringing to the story. Your kids notice that and will thank you for it.
That is Such good wisdom, such good wisdom. So now I want to take a little trip down memory lane.
Mhm.
So when you had your first job, maybe a non-babysitting job, but your first job,
Yeah.
what was your job?
Baskin Robbins scooping ice cream. Oh my gosh, I loved it. I grew up in the Lake of the Ozarks, Missouri, and every summer, my mom's girlfriend owned the franchise there, and I just scooped ice cream. It was the best.
And what were some of the lessons that you learned scooping ice cream?
Oh, what an interesting question. I think I learned a lot about customer service. I learned a lot about listening. I was shocked at, age 14, I think is about the time that I started. I was shocked how many times somebody would walk up to me, tell me their order, and I would go get the scoop and the bowl and forget entirely what I was just told. It was embarrassing to me. I'm like, now could you just tell me one more time what kind of ice cream that was and how many scoops you wanted? So I think customer service, listening, and there was a bit of it sounds a little bit funny because it was an ice cream store, but this idea of developing your craft, that there were the scoopers, but then there were the cake makers, and then there were the chocolate banana people. Like you could see there were opportunities for advancement, and I always desperately wanted to be a cake maker. And so, just putting yourself to work at not only observing the people who are doing great at it, but having the kind of personality and attitude and willingness to be called on.
I'm so grateful that I never worked in ice cream parlor because ice cream is like one of my it's my kryptonite.
I hear you. And we got free ice cream every time we worked. And I ate it and I kind of fudged on the size that I was supposed to be having.
I worked at a restaurant called the Spaghetti Factory. They
Oh,
had
yeah.
only spumoni. When I worked there, they only had spumoni, and I was grateful. That's all they had because I didn't care
You
for
should
it.
like it. That's
Like
good.
there are just some places one shouldn't work because
Right, right.
it's not going to stop.
Yeah.
So you learned customer service there. You learned listening, and where did you go from there?
After that, I sort of did that off and on in the summers, and then I really enjoyed mostly working as a camp counselor. So there were a number of different camps that I gave my summers to. One was a camp for developmentally disabled kids and adults. And this was a camp that they could come to where everyone else was like them. And the parents that would drop their kids off there were just so grateful that their kids could come have a sense of normalcy in themselves, where they feel like sometimes society doesn't allow them that. And I so enjoyed doing that. That was a fantastic job. And then I did a couple of other camps, sort of Christian youth camps, and some that involved travel internationally and just being supportive in that way.
Have you ever had a job that you didn't enjoy? You don't have to name the place specifically if that's the case, but
Oh yeah. It's interesting because I was just talking to my daughter last night about a class that she's not enjoying. And we were talking about ways that she could intersect with this class differently in order to create some more positive energy around the fact that she's not getting out of it. And I think that I had a job like that too, where I didn't like it because it was hard. I was watching that in her last night too, that just the fact of the challenge, wanting to be the winner, the person on top, the one who gets it right, the one who gets the A, the one who gets the applause. And the jobs that I didn't like initially were the ones that were the hardest, but the ones that I now can report back to ended up being my favorite, right? Because they taught me the very things I need to be great at what I'm doing now, which was at the time writing. I thought I was a great writer. And I remember going to one job and the guy looked at it and he was just like, this is awful. You really need to write in the ways that we're expecting you to in this position. And I learned how to do it. And again, like I said, to this day, so grateful when I'm writing now, because I'm writing a blog every week. I'm doing social media content every week. I'm writing letters to people. That job made me the writer that I am today, but I will tell you, I did not like it in the process.
and that's so true that often the things that give us the biggest pain we don't like, but they give us some of the best lessons. They help to develop us the most, right? And then we get
exactly
to
like
take
divorce.
that
Yes.
and move it forward.
Yeah, I wish there was a different way around it, to be honest with me. But I tell my clients, and frankly, I tell my children too, pain is the invitation. Throughout history, long ago till now, pain is the invitation. You can skip by that invitation, or you can take it and mine everything you can out of it in order to become a better, more beautiful
I'm
person.
going to add that to my collection. I like that. And, because that's the process of um, carbon into diamonds, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
Diamond pressure,
Yes.
that is the process of caterpillars and the butterflies.
Mhm.
The change isn't necessarily, and that growth and learning isn't necessarily easy or fun, but it is what really helps us to blossom ultimately. And if we allow it into who we can be. And the same thing I think applies to the clients that you're working with who are going through divorce. It's like going through that metamorphosis, that change process. On the other side can be something beautiful, but you've got to, unfortunately go through that process to get there.
Yeah. And when I'm talking to people, and if you would have told me, and I'm curious to know if you would have felt this way too, there was no way in the world you were going to convince me that I was going to feel better in my divorce. I mean, it really became this all-encompassing darkness. And I was like, oh, this is the new normal. The new normal is I'm feeling crushed and burdened and despairing every day of my life. Awesome. And people be like, oh, it's going to get better. Oh, you're going to do. I was like, no, I don't want that message. I couldn't receive it at that time. And so I talk to my clients now less from a place of, oh, just hang in there, it's going to get better, because I know that I personally resented that message. And more this idea of parsing out, and I'm sure you've heard it before, the difference between pain and suffering. Pain is inevitable in divorce. Suffering is optional, and the suffering is caused by your resistance to what your reality is. And usually your reality is who your co-parent is. And so working on how to really acknowledge and take action in the place that you can, which is getting rid of your resistance. And that's a journey that for me took longer than I wanted it to. And part of my mission in divorce coaching is to help people compress the amount of time that it takes to get through probably what's an inevitable resistance window, right? But just to sort of shorten it to the extent that you can.
That's an awesome thing. You've written a book.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your book.
Yes, thank you. It's called The Best Worst Time of Your Life, which is what I always refer to my divorce as: 4 practices to get you through the pain of divorce. It's just come out. It was an international bestseller on its pre-release launch day, so that was exciting for me. And thank you. And so it's available on Kindle for pre-order right now. Paperback and hardback will be available on April 30th. And it's really a book. There's a lot of books that talk logistics when it comes to divorce, and that kind of material, I think, is widely available and widely needed. And so I'm glad people can find it. The thing that was harder for me to find in my divorce was, what do I do with the absolute crushing of my soul that's happened? And so this is really a story less about the type of lawyer you need to get or the type of custody arrangement you need to try to fight for, and a lot more about how do you work in alignment with the pain so that it can serve you into the next chapter of your life. And so those practices are really about getting your insides going and working on what it takes to have what it sounds like you have, which is a life that is full and expansive and in support of your children and in support of yourself.
It is now. It took some time.
It took some
I
time.
honestly say that my early days were more destructive than constructive, but
Sure.
it was out of that. And again, talking about the learning the lessons, right? What I was doing wasn't getting me where I wanted to go. And so since it wasn't serving me, I had to make choices. And so that's what propelled me in a different direction.
I'm just so glad you had that inner wisdom to see that. I mean, I work with a lot of people who are just sort of alighting upon that idea that they have a considerable amount of control in how they tell the story, right? Because you can tell the story any way you want it. It's all made up. and you can make it up in any direction you want, and you can be the hero of it. The trick is to not always make your co-parent the villain of it.
Right.
And really our kids want to
And
hear
ultimately, co-parent is irrelevant to the story.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Right. It's interesting you say that, because I contributed to a book, The Women Who Empower, and as I was working through my contribution to that, the conversation I was having with the coach working through that, she's like, this isn't a story about him.
Yeah.
And she just said, this isn't a story about him. So
Right.
let's tell your story.
Mhm.
And ultimately irrelevant in that. So
Yeah, it's fascinating because my co-parent, so I asked him to read my book before I released it, because I feel like it's an act of parenting on his part to be comfortable with the story and my telling of it. And he was so gracious in it. And it was very interesting. This many years later, he read it and he was like, I didn't know you did that. I didn't know that was happening for you. Oh, that was interesting that you did that. I remember you doing that, but I didn't know that was what was going on. And I was sort of shocked myself. I'm like, we have a really, and we both reflected on, like, we have a really great relationship and neither of us has been working on it with each other. We just became better individuals.
yeah,
And that served our relationship. But it was funny. I was like, wow, this is really illustrating what I'm talking about, which is I didn't need you to make this awesome. I'm making it awesome because I can. And thankfully you're able to contribute to that too, but I didn't need you to do it.
right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if someone wanted to work with you, Andrea, how would they go about doing that?
Sure. You can, I just encourage everybody to start out with a complimentary discovery call. I offer those on my website, AndreaHippsDivorceCoach.com. And in those 30 minutes, that gives us a chance to really hear out what it is you're going through, because coaching is not for everyone, right? There's a difference between therapy and coaching. Some people need therapy, some people need coaching. And so that's a good time for you to sort of get an evaluation as to which direction might be helpful for you. And typically, even if we don't choose to work together, I can give you an action plan or just some red flags to be watching out for, even as you just pursue your own course. So I love the chance to sort of gather people that way. If you choose to work with me, I tend to work with people either in a 4-pack or a 12-pack. 4-packs generally for people who are years out from their divorce, who are really just trying to clear out some final weeds. The 12-pack really helps us get into a whole course load of material. And so we work one-on-one in our hour of coaching every other week, but then I'm backfilling you with custom designed homework for your life. I don't do courses right now because the issues are so specific and I love to dial into them so we can get the maximum freedom. So I backfill that with homework so we can deal with the issues that are standing on tiptoe for you in the session. And then you're working on some of the basics that I think people need as they're marching through divorce or post-divorce life. So that's generally how I work with people. And like I said, you can get started in that path on my website.
Awesome. It turned out okay.
Yeah, I'm all over. Yeah, I'm all over what you did.
But I will honestly say in this moment, if you had been available at that time, I definitely would have availed myself of your services. I think the ultimate bottom line is that you said you could condense that, right? That process to shorten that I could have moved through and gotten to the other side quicker than I did. It still would have had some of the same challenges I imagined, but could have gotten there quicker. So I want to thank you so much for coming on, for sharing about your story, sharing what you're doing. I think you're doing awesome work, and just thank you.
Well, thank you. And thank you for having me. And thank you for sharing your story, because it helps me to know that there is so much worth and value in prioritizing yourself as you go through divorce, and not necessarily your sense of family, that you alone influenced what your family became. So that was great for me to hear too. So thank you.
Well, and I would just want to say this for you watching. The bottom line, whether it's in your romantic life or your work life, the bottom line is it's yours, and you get to decide what it looks like on the other side. So, as you are exploring challenges in your current work situation and where you want to go next, have a vision for it. Think about those values and the priorities that you want to protect and put boundaries around so that you can live the life, do the work that you ultimately love. So thank you for joining Andrea and I today, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.